Take a breath. Get comfortable tonight. We're unlocking a forgotten drawer in history's quiet cabinet. You might not know what's inside, but I promise it hums with stories. Stories of women who once stood on the edge of society, not by crime or rebellion, but by the simple fact of being alive after the men were gone. Widows, spinsters, and the unnamed ones who slipped through the cracks of medieval life. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake with cold feet and no one beside you. The fire went out sometime in the night, and the hearth is just a shadow of gray dust and yesterday's wood. Your bed, if one could still call it that, is made of straw stuffed into sackcloth. It crinkles when you move, and not in a charming way. You shift your weight and stretch your legs into the emptiness left by someone who used to snore dream or steal the blanket. Now, only the chill presses against your side. This is the widow's wake-up call. Not a bell, not a rooster, but the peculiar silence of absence. You sit up slowly, spine protesting, feet searching for the wooden floor. It's warped uneven, but it remembers your steps better than most people do. Outside, a fog curls at the corners of the cottage, not yet sure if it wants to become mist or stay put. The coals are dead. You knew they would be, but still, you stare into the hearth, willing a miracle that never quite shows up. It's not a tragedy. It's just another day. Your hands creased with work and stiff with cold fumble for your shawl. It smells like smoke and time. Not bad, honestly. You wrap it around your shoulders and get to your feet with a grunt that you hope no one hears because you're still trying to convince the village you're not that old. Truth be told, widowhood in the medieval world is a bit like being a ghost who still has to pay taxes. You're neither fully part of the living those couples bustling to mass, those children chasing chickens, nor are you quite gone. You drift in the space between roles, no longer a wife, never again, a maiden, and not yet saintly enough for legend. Just here. Sweeping, cooking, breathing. Some women remarry, some don't. You didn't. There were offers, of course. A miller whose breath smelled like cider and secrets. A blacksmith who thought you'd be grateful enough to ignore the bruises he left on his previous wife. And that one merchant who had more debts than teeth. You said no, quietly, politely, then with increasing firmness. And so now the neighbors whisper, not in malice mostly, but curiosity is its own form of sharpness. Why hasn't she married again, they wonder. What does she do with her evenings? And the classic, what's she hiding? You smile when they ask. It's easier than answering. This morning, you move through your tasks, like a wheel follows a rut in the road. You stoke the hearth again, with damp wood and dry patience. You knead the bread dough, whispering the recipe, not because you need to remember it, but because someone needs to say your grandmother's name. You sweep the floor that will never stay clean, and you try not to think about the ache in your hip. There's a certain quiet that only women like you know. Not loneliness precisely, more like the absence of being needed. Once your day began with someone asking what was for breakfast. Once you kissed a forehead and tucked in a tunic. Once you shared a bench with someone who scratched his beard and told the same story for the 20th time. Now, the only voice that speaks back is the kettle when it hisses. But there's a strange freedom in it too. No one tells you to mend their socks. No one scolds if the broth is too thin. You can hum without being interrupted. You can light a candle just because you want to see the wax pool. Of course, the price of that freedom is invisibility. In medieval towns, widows were often caught in the in-between. You were no longer under your husband's legal protection, but that didn't make you legally independent. Depending on the region and the bishop's mood, you could inherit property, run a stall at market, even join a guild. But you could also find yourself dispossessed by your in-laws, suspected of witchcraft, or simply ignored. And the strange historical truth, some widows actually preferred it that way, because unlike maidens who were property waiting to be claimed, and wives who belonged to their husbands, widows occupied a liminal space. No longer defined by fertility, they were dismissed by some, but also feared by others. You sitting at the edge of your hearth know this in your bones. You remember when the priest started speaking more slowly around you, as if your ears had aged overnight. You noticed when the neighbor's daughter stopped asking for help with her stitching. You didn't mind. Not really. What you did mind was the way people looked over your shoulder instead of into your eyes. Your cat whines around your ankles. She doesn't mind your age, your past, or your plain black dress. She just wants warmth. You pick her up and let her purr against your ribs. She doesn't know she's keeping you company. Or maybe she does. The rest of the morning stretches ahead like a long piece of thread that won't quite knot. You have chores, of course. Always. A widow's home doesn't clean itself. And though your name might not be on a family tree in gold lettering, you still matter. You still keep the corner of the village where you live from falling into dust, and you wonder sometimes what it would have been like to be remembered, not for dying nobly, not for marrying well, just for waking up every day alone and still making bread that you think should count for something. And it does. It just never made it into the scrolls. You're not a widow. You're something even less explainable. Unmarried. Over 30. And still breathing somehow. In a village where women are supposed to transition neatly from daughter to wife to mother to gone. You've managed to hover in the space between like a forgotten ink blot on a parish scroll. You live alone, not because you couldn't marry, but because you didn't. And that to many is the most suspicious thing of all. This morning, you're stacking kindling outside your cottage door, layering twigs with the precision of someone who has no one else to do it. You've learned which branches snap clean and which ones lie. You mutter a soft prayer to Saint Bridget, not because you're particularly pious, but because the wind's blowing in a strange direction today, and you've learned not to tempt fate. Inside, the fire still sulks in yesterday's ashes. You crouch, coax it back to life with breath friction and more hope than science. Medieval fire starting, as it turns out, is not a romantic art. It's a slow, sputtering dance between wood and willpower. And when the flames finally catch, you sit back on your heels, watching them flicker like you've won a small battle against indifference. You haven't spoken to anyone today. It's almost noon. That's the thing about being a woman alone in the Middle Ages. You're both everywhere and nowhere, needed in 10 places, yet asked to speak in none. You help your neighbor's daughter birth her lamb, and no one writes your name down. You offer herbs for someone's stomach ache, and they whisper that you're a little too good with roots. Still you wake. You light fires. You live. There was a time not long ago when your cousin tried to fix you up with the cooper's son, a boy with fine teeth and the attention span of a cabbage. You smiled, politely declined twice, and then made it awkward enough that he never visited again. You didn't want his hands in your bread dough, nor his sighs in your sleep. Some women feared spinsterhood, You feared compromise. Not that there aren't consequences. You're marked, of course. When food goes missing, someone mentions you weren't at Mass. When the priest coughs, a child murmurs something about your pot of dried yarrow. You ignore it. Mostly. Because truly, the best part of being unmarried is that no one expects you to explain yourself. You don't have to wear your hair a certain way. You can eat when you're hungry instead of when someone else is. You can sit in silence and think. Or not think. Or hum an off-key tune while shelling beans. And yet even with all this space, you're not quite safe from history's judgment. Unmarried women in the Middle Ages existed in a category so invisible it bordered on myth. They weren't celebrated like virgins, nor protected like wives. If they were lucky, they worked. If not, they begged. Some found sanctuary in convents. Others carved their own strange corners into the world, quietly, persistently, without permission. You've made peace with being an oddity. You tend your own garden, a crooked rectangle of soil behind your house, where lavender grows stubbornly, despite the soil's best efforts. You dry herbs on your windowsill. You sell buttons and mending on market days, though few men buy from you unless their wives insist. And still you thrive, in your own quiet, scandalous way. This afternoon you wash your hair. It's not a ritual. It's not spiritual. It's just overdue. You fill a basin with water that bites your hands, scoop it over your head, and scrub until the suds smell like nettle and honesty. A raven watches from the fence. You nod at him. He doesn't respond. That's fair. Later, you hang your linen shift to dry and wrap yourself in the second best one, the one without too many mended seams. You're clean and alone and alive. That's more than many can claim. When you pass the churchyard, one of the baker's boys asks, "Do you talk to yourself?" "Miss." You smile. "Of course," you say. "At least I'm interesting." He laughs, uncertain. You keep walking, because deep down, you know that your existence defies the pattern. You are a woman who chose herself, in a time when that choice was neither easy nor celebrated. That doesn't make you a legend, but it makes you quietly extraordinary. And that perhaps is enough. Your bed is small. It's not meant for two. It barely welcomes one. The straw inside it smells faintly of time and regret, a mixture you stuffed there on purpose last winter when you were feeling both nostalgic and congested. At night, the covers slide away like they're disappointed in your choices, and the wind whistles through the shutters with the judgment of your great-aunt's ghost. But it's your bed, and more importantly, there is no one in it but you. Which is, of course, both the problem and the point. In your village, no one says it outright, but beds are meant to be shared. Preferably with a husband. Occasionally with a second cousin. Hopefully before anyone notices. The idea that you might choose to sleep alone, that your body might belong to you, and not to a marital contract or a moment of negotiation under the ale tent is strange. Suspicious even. You light a beeswax candle, not because you need the light. Your fingers know the shape of this cottage, better than they know the shape of any man's jaw, but because the act of lighting something feels defiant. It reminds you you are here. You exist. You are neither a ghost nor a mistake. Just a woman with flame and flint and the gall to use them. There are rumors, of course. They swirl like chimney smoke, soft, persistent, and a little bit stupid. They say you read things, though you don't. They say you sleep with the moon, though you wish you could. They say your hands are too dry, your face too serene, your laugh too knowing. They say what they cannot understand. You remember when Mistress Annette, married at 15, buried at 32, once pulled you aside and whispered, "They only gossip because they envy the room you take up." You had smiled politely, but you knew she was wrong. They gossip because you don't fit. In this place, widows have rules, maidens have rules, wives have chores, but you're a problem wrapped in linen. The irony, of course, is that sleeping alone doesn't mean sleeping in peace. You still wake with the cockerel. You still dream of boiling laundry and miscounted eggs. You still startle at strange noises, because in the quiet, every creak becomes either a thief or a metaphor. And the weight of the day still lingers on your back, like a stone that won't roll off. Still, your solitude holds a certain luxury. You sprawl if you want to. You mutter secrets to the ceiling. You press your cold feet against warm stoneware and imagine the saints are jealous. You don't have to ask permission to breathe or turn or sigh. There's no snoring, no expectation, only silence. And in that silence, you hear things other people miss. The crack of the fire admitting it's tired, the tick of the eaves dripping down into the soil, the soft murmur of your own mind, half memory, half musing. You catch the shape of yourself in it, not as a villain, not as a victim, but as someone who lived and did not ask for forgiveness for it. Still, the village doesn't love an unsupervised woman. Even your bed becomes suspect. A place of imagined sin, or worse, contentment. A man once tried to gift you a blanket. Lovely thing, blue wool, neat stitches. You refused it. Not because you didn't need it, you did, but because gifts from men are rarely free. They come with stories attached, and your reputation already limps from the weight of too many tales. So you patched your old blanket instead, because at the end of the day, or rather in the middle of the night, there's no rule that says survival has to be romantic. The fire dies. You lie on your back, counting the slats in the ceiling. Sometimes you imagine what it would have been like to marry, to share this tiny room with a man who smells like turnips and knows 4 adjectives. Sometimes you picture a life where your name was said with respect instead of curiosity. But most nights, you just enjoy the space. No elbows, no expectations, just you. And in a world that has spent centuries telling women they are only as valuable as who they belong to, that's a revolution with a feather-stuffed pillow. So you sleep, wrapped not in scandal, but in linen and a little hard-earned peace. It's market day, which means several things at once. The lane will be muddier than usual. You'll overhear 6 lies before breakfast, and if the saints are feeling truly mischievous, someone will ask when you're getting married. Again, you tie your scarf tightly, not just against the wind, but as a kind of armor. Market day is both a necessity and a hazard. You need onions, maybe wax, and let's be honest, you also need to see other faces before your own reflection starts talking back. But stepping into the square as a single woman, it's like hanging a sign around your neck that says, "Speculate freely." The stalls are already being set up crooked trestles, groaning under bruised apples, flayed eels, and yesterday's bread, pretending to be fresh. It smells of spice and pig, and smoke. Always smoke. You smile at old Marta, who once mistook you for her dead daughter. She's the only one who asks nothing, just nods and points at the cheapest eggs. You take them, not because you need eggs, but because some kindnesses must be paid for even in silence. Then the baker's wife calls out. Still alone then? She says it like she's inquiring after the weather, but her eyes glint like candlelight on gossip. You nod, smile politely, and pretend your hands are busy counting turnips. 1-2, still unmarried. Market day is when marriage becomes a public sport. Men nudge each other. Women nudge you. Someone's son is recently widowed. Someone's cousin is looking for a good fertile girl. Someone's brother wouldn't mind the age gap. You resist the urge to shout that your womb isn't a communal barn. Instead, you trade 2 leeks for a handful of salt. A fair deal, even if the leeks are mostly leaf and the salt smells faintly of herring. A boy offers to carry your basket. You refuse, not because you aren't tired. Your arms feel like boiled linen, but because you know where such offers lead. First a basket, then a bench, then a ring made of duty instead of desire. You pass the velvet seller. He nods. Once long ago, he'd tried to impress you with a length of rust-red cloth and an awkward poem. He's married now, to a girl who laughs too loudly and walks like she owns both her shoes. Good for her. You wonder sometimes what you might have missed. Not the wedding, not the obligation, but maybe the soft touch of someone who wasn't trying to change you. Still, market day is not the time for longing. It's for bartering, surviving, and resisting the urge to bite back. And then it happens. A man round in belly and short in courtesy approaches. You should marry, he says, as if he's bestowing divine insight. You're not getting younger. You look at his crooked teeth, his nose hair, the way he sweats in winter. I suppose neither are you, you reply sweetly. The fishmonger chokes on his herring. Someone drops a basket of beets. You walk away slowly, letting the silence echo in your wake like the toll of a small, satisfying bell. You reach the edge of the market and sit finally on the stone wall that frames the square. It's cold beneath you, but it's honest. The kind of cold that doesn't pretend to be anything else. You take out your small cloth pouch of dried pears. Chewy, sour, perfect. As you chew, you watch the world shuffle and haggle and point fingers at ripened melons. You see other women wives, daughters, widows, bending, bowing, bargaining. You see how some lean into their role like a second skin. Others wear it like a borrowed coat. You wonder which you look like. A girl passes by, no older than 12, balancing a jug of milk and a frown twice her size. You nod to her. She nods back. And just for a moment, there's no judgment, no accusation, just a flicker of shared understanding. You think maybe that's enough. The sun is already on its way, down bleeding gold through the mist. Your fingers ache. Your back hums its usual complaint. You gather your things. A cracked cup. 2 sprigs of thyme. A bar of soap shaped like a rock. Nothing extravagant. But you walk home with something more valuable. The knowledge that you faced the questions, the whispers, the tired expectations, and did not flinch. In this world, that's a kind of victory. And tomorrow, you'll eat the pears slowly and remember the beet basket hitting the mud. Because laughter, too, is a kind of inheritance. Some garments are stitched with fabric. Others are sewn from stairs. You wake and dress as always layered linen rough wool, a belt to remind your ribs where they belong. But when you step outside, it's not your clothes they see. It's what you're not wearing: a husband's presence, a ring, a role. And somehow, that absence becomes more visible than any embroidery. You're not a wife. You were perhaps once, or maybe not. Maybe you were almost. Maybe you chose not to be. Or maybe someone chose for you. A death, a refusal, a silence. Whatever the path, the result is the same. You walk through the village like someone holding a sign that reads different. Not dangerous, not exactly, but suspicious, like a house with one shutter always closed. There's a way people look at you. The married women glance sideways, quick, like catching a glimpse of a bad dream. The men either ignore you or look too long. And the old priest just nods too slowly, as if each nod is a quiet confession. You wear your veil like armor. It's black, though it doesn't need to be. You're not in mourning. But black keeps questions away, or so you hope. Widows wear black. Unmarried women are supposed to wear hope. You're not quite either. In the spinning yard, the spindles hum. You sit in your usual place, between Mistress Berta, who has 7 children, and Lena, who keeps having boys and wants a girl more than she wants bread. They talk of husbands and wool prices, and who's been limping since the market day fall. You nod. You spin. And in your head, you write stories for each thread. Lean glances at you. You'd make a good wife still, she says softly, as if it's a compliment or a challenge. You smile. You say nothing. The spindle turns. There's a kind of freedom in your state. You own your thoughts, your time. You go to bed without waiting for someone else's snore. You eat when the soup is hot, not when someone else is ready. You light your own fire and know exactly how long it will burn. But that freedom comes with a price. You are a woman without a title. In a world that loves labels. Sometimes when you walk past the bread seller's cart, she gives you the older loaf. Not out of cruelty exactly, but because you don't have a man to feed. As if your mouth is somehow less deserving. As if you're only half here. The church bell rings. Not for you. For a wedding. And just like that, the village pivots. Girls gather at the edge of the square, with flowers in their hair and questions in their hearts. You stand back behind the crowd as the couple steps out, newly bound, newly hopeful. The bride is young, flushed with joy, or fear, or both. The groom is older. They usually are. Someone turns to you and says, "That could have been you." You nod again, but this time you let your lips curve. Yes, you say, could have been. There's a scholarly debate, if you care to know, about how widows and single women navigated their rights. Some say they were more independent, able to inherit, to run shops, to choose. Others argue they were always under suspicion, always half outsiders. Neither fully inside the home, nor fully welcome outside it. You think the truth sits somewhere in your bones between your quiet relief and your quiet resentment. You've never had to clean blood from a husband's boots, but you've also never shared a laugh in the candlelight that wasn't with yourself. Sometimes, in moments, you don't speak aloud. You wonder what it would be like to be seen first, not judged. To have your name said with interest, not pity. To walk through the market without the invisible question trailing behind you. What happened to her? Back in your cottage, you prepare dinner. Mushroom stew. Bitter herbs. A crust that crumbles too soon. You eat slowly. Alone. But not lonely. There's a knock on the door, A girl from the edge of the village, barely 16, with nervous eyes and a belly already telling secrets. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. You let her in. You give her soup. You hand her the thick blanket, even though you'll be cold tonight. Later, as she sleeps in your corner bed, you sit by the fire watching the flames in your hands. They don't shake. Because this, too, is what your freedom means. To open your door. To hold space for someone who has none. To be the quiet place where a storm can pause. No one writes poems about women like you. You are not a muse, not a martyr. You are not stitched into banners or painted onto chapel walls, but you are here. Still. And the world, whether it admits it or not, leans on you more than it knows. Sometimes in the middle of night, you whisper blessings for girls you barely know. Sometimes you stitch charms into hymns, not because you believe they work, but because you believe in doing something. In the morning, you'll rise. You'll gather herbs. You'll mend something small. You'll return the veil to its peg and tie your scarf instead. Because what you wear changes with the day, but who you are, that holds, even when the village forgets to say thank you. Even when it doesn't see you at all, you see yourself. And in the stillness, that's enough. Some work is loud, wood chopping, bread, needing cow chasing. Other work is quieter, softer, but somehow heavier. You spend most of your day doing things no one notices, at least not until they fall apart, like that hinge on the door. The one that's been threatening rebellion since Pentecost. You tap it back into place with a spoon. Not the good spoon, just the sturdy one with the burn mark, or the thatch above your sleeping corner. You've wedged bits of moss into the gaps, layered some old sackcloth over the draft. The wind still gets in, but now it whispers instead of howling. These aren't the kinds of things anyone thanks you for. No one looks up and says, "Oh, this beam hasn't collapsed today, thank goodness for that." No one praises a floor that doesn't creak. No one applauds dry socks. But these small labors are yours. You patch the world so it holds together a little longer. The stool with 3 legs instead of 4. You added a rock. The fence the goats keep leaning on. You tied it with string and hope. The door latch that doesn't quite close, a wedge of wood, wedged just so. Even your own clothes tell the story. That tunic you wear for muddy days, it's been stitched and restitched so many times it's practically more thread than fabric. You once joked it was held together by prayers and potato starch. Nobody laughed. But that's the thing, they don't see how much you do. Because you've made it look easy. You've become so good at preventing disaster, they forget there was ever danger to begin with. Sometimes when the children run inside from the rain, and the fire is still going, still warm, still welcoming, they think it's always been that way. That fires just stay lit by their own will. That water fetches itself. That meals appear without sorcery or sweat. You don't correct them. You just turn the pot one more time so it doesn't stick at the bottom. It's strange being the person who holds things together. You start to feel like one of your own repairs. Functional, quiet, slightly frayed at the edge. There's a saying the older women like to whisper when they think no one listens: if a woman rests, the rafters fall. You've never seen rafters fall, but you've also never seen a woman rest. Sometimes, in the dim hour before dusk, you sit on the stone step outside and breathe. Not rest exactly, just breathe. You watch the chickens chase nothing. You trace the grooves in your hands and wonder when they started looking like your mother's. You remember how she used to rub goose fat into her knuckles when they cracked. You do the same now, though it smells strange and makes the cat follow you around. One of the girls from the neighbor's household once asked you what your job was. You blinked at her, job, as if it were just one. You smiled and said keeping things from falling apart. She didn't get it. She will. One day. There's a little academic scuffle if you're curious about whether medieval women had defined jobs in the sense we think of now. Some argue they were unofficial engineers of domestic life, unpaid, invisible, essential. Others insist women's labor was undervalued because it was framed as love, not skill. You've never seen a parchment praise a woman for tying roof beams with flax, but you've also never seen a monastery kitchen run without one. Your tools are humble needles, scraps ash, leftover wax. But what you build with them? Stability, continuity. Even the hens know who to follow when the sky looks stormy. You fix what breaks, sometimes before it even realizes it's broken, and sometimes, yes, you do it angrily. You mutter to the cracked bowl, to the sagging shelf. Not today, you tell the broom that won't stand up. Not now, you growl at the bucket with the split side. You've never been thanked by a bucket, but you keep mending it anyway. The truth is, you've gotten clever with your fixes. You once used a sheep's jawbone to brace a wobbly loom leg. No one noticed, which somehow made it feel like your best work. You know how to unpick seams and rethread laces with half a comb. You know which kind of wax softens linen thread just enough to keep it from snapping. You know the sound of a beam that's about to sag before it makes the sound. This knowledge doesn't come from books. It comes from repetition, from failure, from waking up one day and realizing no one else was going to do it. And once you know how to fix something, people expect you to fix everything, like the argument between two sisters over who ruined the stew, like the silence in a room after bad news, like the dreams of a young girl who's just realized what being married might actually mean. You don't just fix objects, you patch moods. You sew apologies into quiet gestures. You lift what droop spirits baskets the end of a collapsing bench. No one calls you a craftsman. No one calls you anything, really. But when the butter churn works again, when the candle burns without smoke, when the gate doesn't squeal like a banshee, there's a sigh. A small one. But there. And that sigh means the world is for now in order. Tomorrow, something else will break. A chair, a button, a person. And you'll be there. With thread, with paste, with a hand that doesn't shake, not because it's strong, but because it has to be. And when you lie down at night, you'll hear the gentle creak of a house that mostly holds, because of you. And no one will say it, but they all sleep better, because you don't. Some mornings begin with a scream. Not yours, not this time. It belongs to the chicken. You're not sure what the chicken did. Maybe strutted somewhere. It shouldn't, maybe looked too smug. But one of the children is chasing it, like it owes rent. You step outside to the scene of mild chaos. One toddler has fallen asleep in the firewood pile. Another is crying because someone looked at them too long. And the eldest is attempting to command the geese using a wooden spoon as a sword. You take it all in with the serenity of someone who has already surrendered. The spoon is yours, of course. You'll get it back. Eventually. Probably sticky. The truth is, your day doesn't begin. It unravels. Children, don't come with bells or timetables. They come with sticky hands, loud questions, and a timing that suggests they're trying to interrupt your every thought before it finishes forming. You never meant to be a caregiver to so many. Some are yours, some are borrowed, some just sort of stayed. They follow you like ducklings, though none of them quack, except one. But you think she's pretending. You try to sweep the doorway, but someone needs help unbuttoning their tunic. You reach for the bowl, but someone spilled barley across the entire floor. You blink just for a second, and a small boy is inexplicably on the roof. You don't scream. You just mutter, "Of course you are," and go find the ladder. There's an old proverb. It takes a village to raise a child. You suspect that phrase was invented by someone watching you from a safe distance, offering no actual help. Because in your corner of the village, you are the village. You are teacher, nurse baker, disciplinarian, entertainer, goat wrangler, and occasional lice inspector, and they trust you. Terrifyingly, one of them brings you a worm as a gift. Another calls you mama not mama. A third asks if rain happens because God is crying, and then demands to know what made him sad. You sigh. Then you say something about clouds and angels having arguments. They nod solemnly, and then stick a bean up their nose. The chickens, meanwhile, remain unbothered by all of this. You once tried to explain that chickens are not pets, but that lesson vanished the moment one was given a name. Now there's Buttercup Hazel and Sir Peck-a-Lot. Sir Peck-a-Lot is mean. He waits until you bend over and then makes his move. You suspect he enjoys the chaos. The chores don't stop just because you're being followed. You sweep with one hand and hold a child with the other. You mash barley while mediating a dispute over who got the bigger turnip yesterday. You sew a ripped tunic while someone small uses your knee as a chair. And you don't mind. Not really. Because sometimes one of them falls asleep with their head in your lap. Sometimes one of them sings you a song with no words. Sometimes they bring you a wildflower and say, "This looks like your smile." You nearly cry then, but you don't. There's no time. You're too busy trying to stop a goat from eating the laundry. Speaking of goats, there's one that doesn't like children, but tolerates you. You've named her Judgment. She stares at everyone like they've disappointed her personally. Somewhere between the chicken chase and the oat porridge crisis, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the basin water. Hair a little wild, apron smudged, eyes tired, but there's something else too, a steadiness. Because no matter how much chaos erupts around you, you're still standing, still feeding, still soothing, still tying tunics and washing mud from knees. And that's something. There's a point of academic curiosity here. Were medieval women constantly surrounded by children? The short answer, yes. Due to high birth rates, large families foster arrangements, and the tendency to raise others' children when needed. Most women, especially widows and unmarried ones, had a hand in caring for the next generation. You didn't need to be a mother to be mothering. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being touched all day. Sticky fingers, tugging sleeves, wet noses pressed against your hip. You've developed a sixth sense for silence. If it's too quiet, something is wrong. You once found a child trying to baptize a cat in the wash bucket. The cat has never trusted you since. You used to dream of stillness, of a room where you could hear your own thoughts. Now you dream of someone else making the porridge. And yet, there's magic in the mess. The giggle that bubbles up from the corner when you least expect it. The moment two children, usually sworn enemies, fall asleep holding hands. The makeshift crown made from weeds and ribbon placed gently on your head by small, reverent fingers. You are exhausted, but you are needed. Not for your cleverness, not for your sewing, not even for your soup, for your steadiness, for being the lap, the hand, the voice that says, "You're safe now." You once thought your life would be simpler, quieter, maybe with a little embroidery and an herb garden. Instead, you are managing a tiny kingdom of chaos and crumbs. But in this kingdom, you are queen, not the kind with jewels or pageantry, the kind who knows when to share the last apple, the kind who remembers which child fears thunder and which one lies about it. And when the night finally falls, when the chickens roost, the porridge is scraped clean, and the children snore like miniature blacksmiths, you sit by the fire holding one sock. You still haven't finished darning, and you smile, because somehow, in all this noise, you've built something gentle. And that is no small thing. What you eat when you're allowed to. You don't plan your meals. Your meals plan you. There's no question of craving or cuisine, only of what's available and when it dares to appear. This morning, like most starts, with something warm gray and vaguely hopeful porridge. Not sweet, not salted, just there. A bowl of survival. You stir it with the same spoon you used yesterday and the day before that, though the handle's more splinter than wood now. The fire barely remembers how to burn. The ashes protest your request for heat, but after some coaxing and muttering a few choice words to Saint Martha, patron of kitchens, you get something that's almost a flame. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is eaten standing up, always standing. You lean against the doorframe and take slow bites, watching the village wake up as your teeth meet something that might be a stone or might just be barley. Eating in silence has become your habit, though you suspect it's also your preference. When you were a girl, meals were loud brothers squabbling someone, always spilling something, your mother telling someone off your father, muttering about grain prices. Now, it's just you and the crackle of the fire, and sometimes even that is too loud. By mid-morning, your stomach forgets it's been fed. It starts whispering again, gently at first, then with increasing dramatics, as if auditioning for a tragedy. You distract it with chores. Clean the hearth, mend a hem, count the dried beans, again, as if maybe they've multiplied out of pity. They haven't. At noon, the village bell rings, not for a meal, but for the Angelus. Still, the sound triggers a reflex. Even if you don't pray anymore, your hands pause as if they remember how. Lunch is not a guarantee. Sometimes it's whatever was left over. Sometimes it's a crust of bread you've been hiding since last market day. Once in a while, someone hands you a fig or a bit of cheese from the communal board, usually when they're feeling generous or guilty. You once heard a baker's wife say that eating alone turns a meal into a task, not a pleasure. You'd agree, but only if you had the energy. Most days, food is just fuel, like firewood or hay. Not a joy, not a moment, just a necessity. And yet there are moments, tiny rare ones, like when you find wild thyme near the hedge and you mix it into your stew, or when the honey jar isn't empty and you allow yourself a fingerful just for the sweetness. These are secret meals, the kind that make you close your eyes for a moment longer than necessary. You remember feast days. Not many, but enough to know what celebration tastes like: roasted root vegetables glistening with fat, soft cheese, a honey cake with a crust so delicate it broke when you looked at it too hard. But feast days are for the church, for the married, for those with a seat at someone's table. Unmarried women, especially those not cloistered, are often expected to eat whatever remains: a heel of bread, a ladle of broth that's more water than substance. Some believe this modesty is holy, others just call it rationing. There's a peculiar rule that unmarried women are often expected to eat after the men, after the children, after the ones with titles or ties. You're used to being last, not always out of cruelty. Sometimes it's simply order. Other times it's a subtle judgment, an unspoken math that equates marriage with merit and your place in line with your place in life. Still, your body adjusts. It becomes clever. You've learned how to stretch a handful of lentils into 2 meals. You know how to soak stale bread in hot water with herbs and pretend it's soup. You know the edible weeds from the ones that bring visions or death, and you know how to smile when someone asks if you're managing. There's a scholarly argument tucked somewhere in the margins of medieval history. Books were unmarried women nutritionally disadvantaged. Did their status leave them hungry more often? Or were they skilled enough in domestic management to stay fed? Some point to poor health records and skeletal evidence signs of iron deficiency, stunted growth, tooth decay. Others argue that women like you, free from feeding a family or a husband, had better control over what little they did have. That independence allowed for intention. You think it's both. And neither. You've known weeks where you lived on broth and prayer, and others where you traded mending for eggs and bartered herbs for barley, and felt briefly like a queen, not a crowned queen. Just one who knew her pantry well enough to plan 3 days ahead. Evening comes like a sigh. You light the hearth again and prepare supper, a generous word for what's really warmed leftovers. Still, the act is comforting, ritualistic. The same movements, the same bowl, the same pause to scrape the sides and wonder if you've ever truly eaten your fill. Outside, smoke curls from neighboring chimneys. You smell onions, pork, even apples in some houses. You allow yourself the luxury of envy for a moment. Then you stir your pot again and hum a tune no one taught you. You sit on your stool by the fire and eat slowly. This is your meal. Not shared, not passed, not counted. And though the flavor is simple and the texture uneven, it belongs to you entirely. Tomorrow, you'll start again. Porridge, porridge, and more porridge. But tonight at least your belly is warm and your hands are steady. And somewhere in the distance, a feast bell rings for someone else. But you don't mind. You have your bowl, your breath, your quiet. And in this moment, it is enough. The art of appearing busy when you're just exhausted. There's a broom in your hand. You don't remember picking it up, but there it is, bristled, uneven, and faithful. It's not sweeping anything, not really. The floor was swept hours ago, and any new dirt is the good kind, the kind that hasn't yet earned judgment. But still, you hold the broom, because holding it makes you look occupied, and looking occupied is everything. You're not just tired. You're the kind of tired that sinks into your bones, that makes even your thoughts move sluggishly like sheep in thick mud. But resting? Resting is not something you do in public. Not unless you want people talking. Not unless you want the priest's niece whispering that idleness is a sin and sin leads straight to scandal. So, instead of sitting, you lean. Instead of closing your eyes, you squint at the corner as if inspecting a very stubborn speck of dust. Instead of breathing deeply, you sigh just enough to be heard, just enough to say, "I am burdened," without sounding like you're asking for help. It's not just about appearances. It's about protection. In a village like yours, a woman alone is already a question. A woman alone and resting. That's practically a statement. And statements lead to stories. She has too much time on her hands, they'll say. Or worse, she has time to think. Thinking for a woman like you is dangerous, at least in the eyes of others, especially when you've got no husband to tether your thoughts, no children to distract you, no official role to explain why you're still breathing and not stirring soup. So you keep moving, or at least pretending to. You sew patches onto cloth that doesn't need mending. You rearrange onions. You count logs. Twice. Sometimes you sweep the same stretch of dirt for 10 minutes, hoping your back doesn't betray you by creaking too loudly. Mistress Joanna once caught you resting against the garden wall. You weren't even sitting, just leaning with your eyes closed for a single blissful moment. She clucked her tongue and said something about sloth. You nodded, as if ashamed. Then spent the next hour hoeing dirt that had already been hoed. It's not about productivity. It never was. It's about optics. You once heard a traveling friar preach that work is the soul's armor. But he had a full belly and soft hands, so you took that sermon with a grain of salt and then used that grain to flavor your dinner. There's a strange paradox at play. Everyone is tired, but no one is allowed to admit it. Not the wife with 6 children. Not the shepherd with gout. Not the elderly widow who still bakes bread, even though her hands shake like autumn leaves. And certainly not you, the woman with no one to care for. Because apparently, without dependence, your weariness must be imaginary. After all, how can you be tired if you're not mothering, not nursing, not harvesting a husband's legacy? But you are tired, not from lack of work, but from the constant choreography of being seen working. You dream of naps, not long ones, not indulgent ones. Just 6 minutes with your eyes closed, your arms, loose your thoughts, your own. But dreams like that are reserved for nuns or noblewomen, or men dozing at alehouses after doing half the chores you do. Sometimes you pretend to drop something so you can crouch for a moment longer than necessary. Sometimes you carry a full basket, even when it's empty, just so you can walk slowly through the village unbothered. There's a kind of theater in your life, a performance of effort, and you've become very good at your role. Academic arguments abound about invisible labor. Modern historians call it the cognitive load of medieval women, the unseen planning, remembering, organizing. Who fed the chickens? Who borrowed the spindle? Who still owes a favor from last Michaelmas? But in your day, it isn't theory, it's survival. You remember that the miller's daughter likes her bread crusty, that the candlemaker's apprentice talks too much, that the priest's dog has a limp. These aren't facts, they're strategies. Knowing them makes you useful. Being useful keeps you safe. Invisibility, oddly enough, requires constant visibility. You cannot disappear, or they'll forget you. But you cannot stand out, or they'll question you. So you become the backdrop, the helpful shadow, the quiet presence, the broom, always moving just enough to be noticed, never enough to cause dust. Dinner is late tonight. You've delayed it on purpose, giving yourself a reason to stay up to keep the light burning. You stir the pot slowly, even though it's nearly empty. You adjust the logs in the fire with exaggerated care, though the flames are steady. You hum softly, but audibly, so that anyone passing might say, "Ah, she's still working." And when you finally sit, it's not because you're finished. It's because no one is looking. You exhale silently. Stretch your legs. Let your shoulders fall. For once, you do not reach for your spindle. You do not feign motion. You simply exist, and in that stillness, you feel that the weight of pretending to be busy is heavier than the labor itself. You close your eyes just for a breath, and it feels like rebellion. Tomorrow, the broom will be in your hand again, but tonight, just for now, you rest. Because pretending to be tireless doesn't mean you aren't tired. And you've earned every stolen moment of stillness. When it rains, the roof leaks. When it doesn't, the roof still leaks. There's a spot in the ceiling above your bed that you know like a freckle on your own skin. It's shaped like a bird, or maybe a crooked spoon, and it darkens when the weather turns sour. Sometimes it drips softly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat you can't hush. Other times, it just stares back at you, as if daring you to believe in dryness. You've patched it. Oh, how you've patched it. You've stuffed moss into it, tied straw bundles around it, even whispered threats at it. But it remains stubborn and slightly smug, like most problems in your life. Present damp and uninterested in your efforts. When it rains, the leak is a given. You sleep curled like a snail, your feet angled toward the dry side of the mattress, the corner where the straw hasn't mildewed. You place bowls strategically, one at your pillow's edge, one near the hearth, one just inside the door though. That one is for the wind-driven puddles. And when it doesn't rain, it still leaks, not in drops, but in drafts, in sighs, in creaks that suggest the roof is bored and contemplating collapse. The silence of dry weather only makes the decay louder. You try not to mind. After all, it's your roof. You earned every wattle, every thatch, every crooked beam. But some days, especially the long gray ones, you stare at that stain and wonder if it's staring back. Neighbors talk about better roofs. Tiled ones, slated ones. But that's for merchants' millers, or those with husbands skilled in hammering or bribery. Your roof was a gift, a leftover from someone else's rebuild, a thing you inherited without paperwork. And like most gifts from life, it came wrapped in complications. There's a saying, don't look up if you don't want to see your luck. You look up anyway. Sometimes you imagine fixing it properly, gathering reeds in the marsh, soaking them, layering them fresh. You picture yourself perched atop the house like a bird on a nest, weaving your safety into each bundle. But that would take days, and your hands are already claimed by a dozen other needs. So you place another cloth under the drip. You light a candle near the door to distract from the draft. And you hum, because sometimes music holds the house together more than nails. There's an old story, one the washerwomen tell, about a widow whose roof never leaked. But they say it's because she made a deal with the devil. Something about trading her shadow for a dry thatch. You don't believe it, not really. But every time your roof groans in the wind, you wonder what your shadow might fetch. Some nights, the leak feels almost intimate, like a companion, a tiny persistent voice, reminding you that nothing is ever truly under control. And in the medieval world, that's not a threat, it's a norm. You live in a world where ceilings are never permanent, where walls are suggestions, and where the earth itself shifts under your foundation. expecting comfort is a modern luxury. Back then now, for you survival is more important than silence. Function over form. Dry-ish over dry. There's a scholarly debate naturally. Some historians argue that women like you accepted these imperfections with stoic grace. Others claim you complain bitterly loudly and with biting sarcasm. The truth, you do both. You curse the drip when it hits your forehead at midnight. You laugh when it splashes into your soup bowl like punctuation. You live with it because what choice do you have? The church roof leaks too, you've noticed. And no one accuses God of laziness. Your thatch isn't just protection, it's a symbol of status, of neglect of effort made visible. Men's roofs are a reflection of their pride. Women's roofs are a reflection of their labor. And your labor, it's stitched into every soggy beam. Still, you do what you can. You press wax between the seams. You burn herbs in the corners to mask the mildew smell. You pray not for the rain to stop, but for it to fall at an angle that spares your pillow. Sometimes you talk to the leak. You give it a name. You joke that it's the only man who visits regularly. Hello, drip, you whisper. Right on time. And when it answers soft plip against clay, you smile. Because even annoyances can be companions. There's something strangely comforting in the predictability of the imperfection. You know where the water will fall. You know which blanket to fold twice. You know which step to avoid when the floor swells from moisture. Other people have worse. That thought comforts you too. Mistress Berta's roof collapsed last spring, right in the middle of Lent. They said it was judgment. You said it was rot. The priest agreed with both. You helped patch it, of course. Carried bundles on your back, handed up straw, steadied ladders. No one thanked you. But the roof didn't leak afterward, and that was its own kind of praise. Back at home, you lay down again. The sky outside is clear tonight. No clouds, no threat. But still you sleep with a bowl by your bed, just in case. Because peace, like dryness, is always temporary, but your readiness that endures. You may not have a roof without cracks, but you have one that's yours. And that counts for more than most will admit. In the dark, the rafters creak. You whisper to them gently, "Not tonight, old friends. Let me have this one dry night." And for once they listen. The bowl stays empty. The freckled stain above you does not darken. You sleep, not because the world is perfect, but because for a moment the drip has paused. And that tonight is enough. Dealing with men yours, theirs and everyone else's opinions. You don't dislike men. You dislike being constantly defined by them. You dislike how whether you're near them or not, the world assumes they're the sun, and you the rotating moon. And even when you're perfectly content in your orbit, making soup-patching roofs, gathering herbs, someone will wander by and ask if you miss having someone. As if solitude is a wound that must be stitched with someone's snore. You've known many kinds of men. The kind who speak loudly at dinner but say little. The kind who notice when your hem is frayed but not when your hands are bleeding. The kind who call you girl long after your back has earned the name woman. And yes, you've known a few who were kind, who stirred the pot without being asked, who listened, who walked beside you, not ahead. But none of them are here now. And that's fine. Mostly. Still, you can't escape them, not really. Even now, you are surrounded by echoes of their expectations. Mistress Berta's husband leaves his muddy boots on your step sometimes. By accident, he says, then lingers, looks too long. The miller's apprentice whistles as you pass. Not quite flirtation, not quite respect. The priest, dear old Father Edric, has begun pausing at your garden gate on his walks, making sure the devil's weeds aren't thriving, he says with a chuckle. You smile politely. You nod. You move on. It's easier that way, because once a woman is unclaimed, the village starts treating her like an open pasture. Free to comment on, free to question. Not just your actions, your silences too. If you're quiet, you must be thinking of a man. If you're loud, you must be angry because of a man. If you're neither, you're probably a witch. You've learned how to manage their gaze. You wear your shawl a little higher when the butcher walks by. You bend closer to the herbs when the baker's son lingers too long. You keep a wooden spoon near the door, not because you expect visitors, but because it feels like armor. There's a freedom in being alone, but it's a freedom under surveillance. You once helped Mistress Lean deliver her 6th child while her husband stood in the next room shouting instructions through the wall. Later, he patted your hand and said you'd have made a good mother. You wanted to ask, what makes you think I haven't been one? But you didn't. You smiled. You stirred the soup. You went home. Because every conversation with men has an unspoken footnote. Don't be too much, too sharp, too bold, too certain, and you become something to fear. Too soft, too quiet, too agreeable, and you become something to use. There is perhaps no just right, not unless you're in a painting, or dead. There's a scholar, her name was Hilda of Bruges, who argued in a dusty margin that unmarried women existed between categories, neither maidens nor mothers. Suspicious not because of what they did, but because of what they didn't. They didn't bear heirs. They didn't submit. They didn't soften the sharp edges of a man's reputation. You liked Hilda, though she's been dead 300 years. Her ink felt honest. She understood that women like you aren't unfinished, they're uninvited. Still, you play the part. You nod at the merchants. You chuckle at the jokes you've heard 100 times. You avoid walking too quickly or too slowly. You smile when you don't feel like it, because frowning invites questions. Are you bitter? Are you lonely? Do you ever regret it? Sometimes in your head you say yes, no, and none of your business. But out loud you say something about the weather, because that's what's safe. That's what keeps you from becoming a story they tell over ale. There's a boy, apprenticed to the cooper, who once asked if you were a crone. You laughed, not cruelly, but loud enough that he turned pink and backed away. You're not old, not young either. You're what happens when a woman is given time to become herself. And to some, that's the most unsettling transformation of all. Because a woman who needs no man is a woman who might need nothing at all. And people don't know what to do with that. Still, the world turns. And the men keep talking. The merchant complains his wife nags. The plowman brags that his doesn't speak. The knight, when he visits, says nothing at all, just watches like he's deciding what your silence is worth. You sip your tea. You listen. You endure. And when they finally go home to their women who mend, feed, tend, and vanish into their tasks, you sit by your fire, grateful. Not because you dislike their company, but because you love the sound of your own breathing more. There's no lesson here, not really. Just a quiet truth. You exist outside their lines. And that perhaps is the most radical thing of all. In the end, you hang up your shawl. You blow out your candle. You whisper goodnight to no one in particular and sleep, because your peace doesn't depend on being seen, only on being left alone. And tonight, that's exactly what you are. The many uses of a wooden spoon. You keep it by the hearth where the firelight glints along its worn curve. Not a weapon, not quite, but not just a spoon either. The smooth grain of the wood has shaped itself to your hand over years, decades maybe. It's the tool that stirs soup and stops arguments. It turns porridge, chases off geese, and once sent a full-grown man running after he mistook your doorstep for an invitation. Yes, a spoon. It's remarkable what women can do with very little. You were given this one by your aunt, who told you deadpan that no good marriage survives without it. You were 12. She was 42, unmarried, and known for frightening every tax collector within 5 villages. You still think about that. Most days you do use it for soup, or beans, or whatever passes for dinner, but it's also been wedged under a broken door to keep the wind out. It's tapped rhythmically against the windowsill to warn the neighbor's dog away from your ducks. It's even been used delicately to brush ash from the lip of a letter you almost burned. It's part tool, part companion, part symbol. In a world where women are supposed to be soft, this spoon has become your quiet firmness. No, it's not a sword. It doesn't need to be. You once read, or maybe overheard that, in some courts of Europe, women weren't permitted to carry blades. So they carried scissors, needles, hairpins, anything sharp but domestic. It made them feel safer, or at least seen. You think about that every time your hand finds the spoon without thinking. You don't fear violence, but you do fear invisibility. This spoon at least reminds the world that you exist and that you might poke back if it leans in too far. Of course, the village has its thoughts. She always walks with that thing you heard one man mutter to another as if carrying a kitchen utensil was an act of rebellion. Maybe it is. A rebellion against helplessness, against silence, against the idea that tools should only serve one purpose. After all, neither do you. You've used it to teach. There's a boy, Eden, whose father died early and whose curiosity survived anyway. He once wandered into your kitchen and asked why your stew smelled better than his mother's. You let him stir. You handed him the spoon. You taught him not just to mix, but to wait. He's taller now with broader shoulders and an apprenticeship at the smithy. But he still nods when he passes you. Respect lingers longer than instruction. And once long ago, you used the spoon in anger. A man, you won't name him, cornered you in the alley behind the grain house. Thought your silence meant yes. Thought your age meant no one would care. He didn't expect you to swing. He didn't expect the crack of old wood against shins. He didn't expect you to say calmly and clearly that the next time you'd use the iron ladle. He didn't come back. The handle split a little that day. You smoothed it later, rubbed it with oil, whispered your thanks. Because a woman doesn't always get to choose what protects her. Sometimes it's prayers. Sometimes it's speed. Sometimes it's a spoon. There's a peculiar detail in some monastery inventories. Lists of spoons tagged and labeled by size and purpose. Eating spoons. Stirring spoons. Punishment spoons. Yes. Apparently, in some households, a child's punishment could be measured by the width of the wood. You don't believe in that, but you understand it. In a world that has so little room for softness, even tools become lines of discipline. Still, your spoon has never struck a child. It has only stirred, warned, warded, and occasionally rested like a scepter across your lap when you're particularly tired and someone particularly foolish is talking nonsense nearby. And it always makes you feel rooted, in control in some small way. It's become more than an object. It's an emblem of survival, of autonomy, of the odd pride that comes from being both tender and unyielding. You imagine if a chronicler ever wrote your story, he'd forget to mention the spoon. He'd talk about your herbs, your independence, maybe even your silence. But the spoon, that's too humble, too domestic, too ordinary to matter, except that it does. Because some women wear crowns, and others wield ladles, and some, like you, hold a splintered wooden spoon and somehow keep the whole house, the whole routine, the whole precarious balance of their day from tipping over. There's a kind of majesty in that, not one sung in ballads, but one that keeps the fire going. So tonight, before bed, you stir the embers with it. Not because it's the best tool for the job, but because it's yours, and it listens. Then you place it by the hearth, right where the morning sun will find it. A reminder that you too are useful, consistent, durable, not easily replaced. You lie down with sore feet and a tired spine, and just before sleep, you smile. Because in this kingdom of ash and soup, of aching backs and soft steps, you know exactly where your power sits, and it has a handle. Market days, mud meat, and mild theft. It's market day, which means, naturally, it's raining. Not a soft drizzle either, but the kind of insistent sideways rain that seems personal, as if the sky disapproves of commerce, or your shoes, or the fact that you dared to hope for dry weather just once. You step around puddles, but it's pointless. The mud is ankle deep, the chickens are louder than usual, and someone's child is already screaming about apples. You clutch your basket tighter. Inside, 2 onions, 3 wrinkled plums, and a small bundle of rosemary. That's your currency today. You'll need to be clever. The market square is already humming. Carts creak under damp cloth. Goods laid out in baskets that sag with the weight of expectation. There's wool cheese, dried fish, broken tools someone insists can be mended with spirit, and pies of questionable origin. Everyone is watching everyone else, especially you. You don't have a husband to carry things or scowl at overpricing. You don't have children to distract merchants with sticky fingers. You don't even have a dog to blame for walking too slowly. You are just present. And people notice that. Widows and unmarried women on market day are like loose threads in a tightly woven cloth. Useful, necessary, even, but always tugged at, always tested. Still, you know how to move. You start with old Anna, the herb seller, who owes you a favor from that time you helped with her goat's cough. You trade the rosemary for a lump of beeswax. You tuck it away and move on. At the grain stall, the miller's daughter eyes your onions with mild disdain, but her mother whispers something probably about your knowledge of poultices, and suddenly you have a small pouch of barley in your hand. You smile, thank her, and disappear into the crowd. This is how it goes. Trade by whisper. Transaction by memory. And yes, sometimes by guilt. You're not above reminding someone that you sat with their cousin through a fever, or helped bury their aunt when no one else would. It's not manipulation. It's survival with a polite smile. Near the well, you find something curious, a basket of dyed thread left unattended. Rich colors, saffron woad, blue, a deep red that reminds you of cherries or blood. You don't touch it, but someone else does. A child, maybe 10 fingers sticky from honey, snatches a skein and runs. The seller returns seconds later, furious. Everyone looks around, and somehow, despite standing still, you are part of the accusation. Your lack of escort makes you an accessory in the eyes of suspicion. You raise your eyebrows, gently hold up your basket to show it's still pitifully empty, and move along. But you feel the sting, not of being blamed, but of being so easily available to blame. In the bread queue, you overhear 2 women discussing your shawl. Not that it's particularly fine. It's patched in 3 places, but because it was once your mother's, and people remember her for reasons they don't say aloud. She was clever, one whispers. You pretend not to hear. Cleverness in this place is a dangerous fabric. Worn too obviously, it unravels trust. Worn too quietly, it makes you unforgettable. You wear it anyway. Further down the row of stalls, you reach the meat vendor. Today's selection includes a leg of something probably not rabbit, a string of sausages that smell aggressively hopeful, and a pile of bones labeled for broth. You eye the bones. You know what you can do with bones. You lean in and offer your beeswax. He hesitates. You add a plum. The deal is struck. He wraps the bones in a scrap of cloth and nods gruffly, but not unkindly. And as you step away, you realize your basket is heavier than it began. It always is. Not just with food, but with fragments of stories, overheard rumors, and the 1,000 small observations that make up your mental map of village politics. You know who's stealing wood, who's quietly expecting, and who's been walking too far, out past the hedgerow. You never share this, but you file it away. Knowledge, after all, is its own kind of currency. The market begins to thin. The rain softens into something you might optimistically call a mist, and you pause by the steps of the chapel, not to pray, but to rest. Your feet are soaked. Your hem is stained. Your bones have begun a quiet protest, but you've survived another market day without losing a coin, your temper, or your pride. That's more than some can say. A scholar once wrote that women on the margins of the medieval economy were liminal figures, neither fully in nor out, both necessary and suspicious. You'd call it something simpler, adaptable. The married women have husbands to haggle for them. The wealthier ones send servants. The nuns don't come at all. But you learn, you listen, you shift. You make small trades that ripple out over days, weeks, seasons. You feed yourself, not just with food, but with memory and presence and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you did it all without needing permission. You head home just before sunset. A few geese hiss at you. One tries to steal your barley. You hiss back. Balance once again is restored. Inside your cottage, you empty the basket slowly. Each item has a purpose. The barley becomes porridge. The bones become broth. The beeswax is saved for candles. And the stories, the ones that cling to you like smoke after a fire, become tomorrow's leverage. You sit down with a bowl of warm food, the hem of your dress drying near the hearth, and the wooden spoon from yesterday resting on the table beside you like an old friend. You don't need a witness to prove the value of your day. You already know. And tomorrow, when the sky shifts again and the market opens its muddy gates, you'll return. Because that's what women like you do. You trade, you carry, you remember, and quietly, stubbornly, beautifully you endure. The midday slump naps you'll never get. It's midday, and everything in you aches for a nap. Not a long one, not a luxurious one. Just 6 minutes. 8 if you're lucky. The kind of nap that barely exists, soft and shallow, like the memory of rest. But of course it won't happen, because the stew needs stirring, the hearth needs sweeping, and the chicken that wandered into the grain shed is causing a diplomatic incident with the cat. You pause, holding a wooden ladle in one hand, and the fraying end of your patience in the other. The light that filters in through the crooked shutters is golden and warm like spilled honey. It lands on the floorboards in a gentle pool. You want to lie down in that sunlight, just curl up like a cat and not move. Instead, you keep stirring. Your arms move from memory now. Your back keeps the rhythm. You close your eyes for just a second, but the ladle clunks against the pot, and the illusion of peace breaks like a dropped plate. The midday slump is real. It's the great unspoken truth of womanhood in your world. You can wake early and work hard, but right around the hour when the sun reaches its highest point and the shadows pause to consider their angles, you fade. Your energy thins like broth on the third day, and yet no one talks about it, because rest is a luxury, and you don't wear luxury well. Not as a woman alone, not as someone expected to keep going just a little bit longer, just a little bit more. The unmarried and the widowed are expected to be grateful for the time they have after all they're not raising toddlers or tending husbands. As if independence cancels out exhaustion. As if the mind doesn't fray from silence the same way it frays from screaming. Outside, a child laughs. You don't know which one. They all sound the same at this hour, over-sugared and under-supervised. You catch your reflection in the pot lid, blurred of course by steam and streaks. But there you are, eyes a little puffy, mouth set in a soft line that hints at both kindness and warning. Hair tied back not for style, but survival. You look exactly like yourself, and somehow a little older than yesterday. You sit for a moment on the stool near the hearth, just long enough for your knees to sigh in relief. Not quite a nap, but not nothing. And sometimes, not nothing is the most you can get. In the corner, your mending waits a torn sleeve, a sock with ambitions of being a net, a linen collar scorched at the edge. You'll get to it. Eventually. Probably. The truth is, the midday slump is when everything slows, but nothing stops. It's when the mind wanders, even if the body doesn't. You think about the bread you still need to bake, the herbs you meant to dry, the girl who stayed the night last week and never said thank you, just slipped away before dawn, like a breath you weren't meant to hold. You wonder where she is now. You wonder if she'll be all right. The bread will rise or it won't. The herbs will dry or mold. But that girl, you hope she found something better than a borrowed blanket and soup that tasted mostly like hope. A scholar once claimed that unmarried women had more time for contemplation, that their solitude gave them space to reflect, to learn to read if they could. You think that scholar never had to haul wood at noon or explain to a neighbor why your fire was out when theirs was still going strong. Still, there's a flicker of truth. You do think. You think all the time, while you chop and scrub and stitch and stir. And midday is when the thoughts are loudest. That's the tricky part. You don't always want to hear them. Sometimes they whisper things like, what if this is it? Or what if it isn't enough? Or worse, what if it's more than you deserve? You don't answer. You press your thumb into the dough instead, You pick lint from your sleeve. You hum a song your grandmother sang, but you've never quite remembered in full. And the thoughts drift away, like clouds that threatened but didn't rain. Outside, the sunlight starts to shift. It slides along the wall like a lazy cat curling toward evening. You sigh, stretch stand. Time to fetch more water. Time to do the things that keep the roof from collapsing and the hunger from creeping in. But before you move, you allow yourself one last indulgence. You lean against the doorframe. Just lean. Just rest. Just enough. You remember your mother doing the same, pausing in doorways as if they held answers, or at least balance. Maybe she was tired too. Maybe she had her own midday slumps back when you were too young to notice anything but your own appetite. Now you know. Now you see it. The quiet fatigue of women who carry everything invisible. No medals, no songs, just the expectation to endure. And they do. You do. With dignity that looks suspiciously like stubbornness. And grace that arrives mostly through habit. You pull yourself up. You check the stew one last time. You smooth your apron though it's stained, and everyone knows it. And you go out into the light that's already turning softer. Because rest may not come when you want it, but the work always does. And somehow, some quiet miracle, you keep showing up for it. Not because you're strong, not because you're brave, but because this life, however simple or weary, is still yours. And that somehow is enough. Mending clothes, mending fences, mending everything but yourself. The needle slides through the linen like a whisper. You pull it tight, smooth the fabric, and begin again. You've been mending this same shirt for 3 winters now. First a tear under the arm, then a fray at the cuff. Now a patch across the back that refuses to lie flat. It was never your shirt to begin with. You found it left behind in a box of odds and ends after a neighbor's son moved away. She didn't want it. Said it still smelled like him, and not in a good way. You washed it twice, sewed in a new collar, claimed it as your own. That's what you do mostly. You take what's broken or abandoned and make it useful again. You mend things because it gives your hands something to do, and your mind somewhere to rest. The sun is low. The light is gold and gray at the same time, like something that can't decide whether to stay or go. You sit by the window, squinting at the stitches, and you wonder, when was the last time someone mended something for you? Not just a torn sleeve or a loose hem, but you. When was the last time someone noticed the fray at the edge of your spirit? The thinning hope, the quiet unravel. Your fingers keep working. They always do. Across the field, you see Marta walking her fence line again, same as every week. She's not really looking for breaks in the wood. She's looking for reasons not to go home yet. You understand. The fence is just an excuse. Just like mending is. A way to keep from sitting too long in silence. A way to pretend you're choosing the solitude. That's the real trick, isn't it? To make the world believe your quiet is by design. They call you independent. They mean it as praise, or maybe warning. You nod. You smile. You fold the compliment like a note you'll never reread. The shirt is done. Not perfect, but wearable. That's all most things need to be. You fold it carefully, place it with the others. You'll deliver it tomorrow to the girl with too many siblings and too few sleeves. She'll pretend not to care, but she'll wear it every 3rd day until the threads give out. It's enough. You move to the next task, a shawl that's lost its tassels. You never cared for tassels anyway. They tangle in the wind, catch on splinters. Still, you sew them back, not because they're needed, but because someone might notice they're missing. And you've learned that people don't always say thank you, but they always notice what's been undone. You remember when mending used to mean more. When someone would bring you a sock or a glove and stay for tea while you patched it. When conversation came stitched between the seams. Now people leave things at your door and pick them up the next morning. No knock, no note, just expectation. Sometimes you think that's all womanhood is, the art of invisible maintenance, of tending what no one notices until it breaks, of holding everything together so quietly that no one realizes it ever threatened to fall apart. There's a scholar somewhere, probably in a city full of books and unpatched cloaks, who once wrote that women's labor in the medieval home was subsistence maintenance. You laughed when you read it, because yes, that's what it is. But it's also everything. You mend the cloth, the fire, the food, the calm, the air itself when it grows too heavy with someone else's grief. You are a seamstress of stability, and no one pays you for it. But oh, how they rely on it. You glance at the door. It hasn't been knocked on since last market day. That's fine. You're not waiting. You just notice. Your hands ache a little. You stretch them, roll your wrists, shake the stiffness from your fingers. You'll need them again tomorrow. The neighbor's girl is growing fast. Her hems need letting out. There's a new baby down by the blacksmith's house, already wrapped in swaddles that barely cover his toes. You make a note to stitch a new blanket from your basket of scraps. Not because anyone asked, but because you saw the baby's mother once crying behind the bakehouse with flour in her hair and no time to brush it away. Your thread tangles. You sigh. You start over. The tangles happen more often now. Just like your knees creak more, your eyes blur faster, and your patience arrives in shorter supply. But still you mend, because someone has to. And maybe, just maybe, if you keep sewing the world back together, piece by quiet piece, you won't notice the parts of yourself that have gone threadbare. A cat jumps on the windowsill. Not yours. None of them are. But this one visits often, especially at dusk. It curls against the glass and watches the needle go in out like a heartbeat. You pause and watch it back. There's no one else to share the moment with, but it still feels worth sharing. You whisper something. Nothing important. Just enough to hear your own voice. Then you go back to stitching. You wonder sometimes what the world would look like if everyone patched what they had instead of chasing something new. If we prized repair more than replacement. If we honored the hands that held the needle, not just the hands that held the sword. But that's not the world you live in. So you keep sewing. The fire crackles behind you. The sky dims. One more seam. One more fix. One more quiet miracle. No applause. No witness. Just the steady rhythm of a woman who refuses to let things fall apart. Not completely, not yet. And maybe in some corner of heaven or history, that will be enough. Keeping the peace between goats, neighbors, and siblings. There are days when you feel less like a person and more like a boundary stone. Not quite part of the houses, not quite part of the fields, just placed there to mark the edge between what belongs to others. And today, the goats have knocked the stone over. Again, they're not even your goats. But of course, they've found your garden. You spot them through the crooked slats in the fence, two shaggy intruders chewing your parsley with the focus of monks at prayer. You grab a broom, not to hit them, mind you, just to wave it in that particular way that lets them know you could hit them if you really wanted to. The goats blink at you. They are unimpressed. One sneezes and knocks over your pot of thyme. You sigh. You herd them gently back through the gap in the neighbor's hedge, muttering apologies under your breath to plants and saints alike. Then, like a miracle, the neighbor herself appears. Her name is Imka. Her voice is sharp. Her temper sharper. "Oh, did they get out again?" she says, as if the goats had unlocked the gate with tiny, hairy hands. You nod politely, holding back the urge to ask if her animals were raised by wolves or worse nobles. Imka sees your face and softens just a little. "They like your garden," she says. You smile. So does everyone, it seems. It's not the first time this has happened, and it won't be the last. That's how life is here, too close to avoid, too interwoven to escape. You live side by side, yard by yard, pot by pot. And when one pot cracks, the sound echoes through 3 households. So you learn to keep the peace, even when you don't feel particularly peaceful. Even when you want to scream into a loaf of bread. You become a translator between neighbors, between sisters, between species, honestly. The goat situation resolves more or less, but peacekeeping, like weeding, is a job that never ends. You barely get back inside when there's a knock. It's your younger cousin Frida. She's flushed, fuming, and full of complaint. "They took my spindle," she declares, collapsing onto your bench as if the world is ending. Who's they, you ask, though you already know. Greta, and that beast of a brother she has, Frida huffs. "She said I wasn't spinning fast enough, so she took it," and laughed. You pour her a cup of weak tea. You don't offer sympathy yet. You know the script. There's the outrage, then the recounting, then the tears, then eventually the wondering, "Am I really so hard to like?" You sit beside her. Let her unwind. Let her anger empty itself, like a bucket tipped over slowly. Eventually she sighs. "It's just a spindle." You shake your head. "No, it's more. Because it's always more. It's the spindle. It's the tone. It's the feeling of being the one no one sticks up for." And you know that feeling too well. So you walk her back to Greta's. Along the way, you talk about thread tension and choosing wool like nothing happened. At the doorstep, you nod to Greta's brother. He pretends not to see you. Fine. Inside, Greta tries to bluster. You don't argue. You just stand still. And somehow that works better. Frida gets her spindle back. Greta gets silence instead of fire. Everyone gets to save face. That's diplomacy, village style. Not in scrolls or speeches, but in sighs, in pauses, in choosing when not to raise your voice. Back home, you take a long breath, then another. Then you laugh just a little. Because once again, you've played judge, jury, and emotional janitor, and no one even says thank you. But you didn't do it for thanks. You did it because the village runs on invisible labor. Yours. There's a historian somewhere scribbling in Latin who might say the medieval village maintained itself through informal female networks. That's the academic term. But what it really means is you, and Imka, and Frida, and that girl who knows who borrowed whose ladle and when it went missing. You are the thread that keeps the cloth from tearing wide open. Not just mending seams, but keeping the air between people from splitting. Some days, that means defending yourself with a broom. Other days, it means calming a teenager with tea and silence. And sometimes, only sometimes, it means letting the goats eat your time because it's easier than letting the neighbor feel embarrassed. The sun dips low again. Peace reigns for now. And you sit with your stitching quietly proud that nothing burst today. Tomorrow maybe someone will argue over water rights or accuse someone of stealing eggs. And when they do, they'll come to you, not because you have power, but because you listen, because you stay calm when no one else can, because you remember what it's like to feel small, and you never make others feel smaller. It's not glamorous. It's not even recognized, but it matters. You pour yourself the last of the tea. It's gone cold. Still, it tastes like victory, and you sip slowly, letting the quiet return. For a little while, the goats stay on their side of the hedge, and the world holds, thanks to you. Seasonal panic. Winter is always coming. You wake to a chill you didn't expect. It's not frost, not yet, but the kind of cold that travels under doors and between your toes before you've even stood up. Outside, the trees are sighing, not from wind exactly, from something quieter, a seasonal resignation. The apples are gone, the grain sacks are tighter, and there's that distant sense that your time is being counted. You pull on another layer, even though it's not quite necessary yet. A gesture, really, a superstition of warmth, because winter isn't here, but she's watching. You step outside and take inventory, not of your things, but of your fears. There are the onions drying under the eaves, a hopeful pile of firewood, the herbs you meant to bring in yesterday and forgot. And inside, a mental checklist begins to unfurl like a scroll in a worried monk's hand. How many jars of lentils do I have? Did the last roof patch hold? Do I really think that shawl will last another season? This is the kind of thinking that lives in your bones. Not taught, just inherited. The quiet panic passed down like a wooden spoon. There's a saying the older women murmur when they think the girls aren't listening. Summer feeds, but winter judges. And winter in your village is a harsh judge indeed. She doesn't shout. She just arrives, uninvited, unforgiving. You remember one season when you were a child and the snow fell in October. The bread ran out in February, and your neighbor's baby didn't make it to March. You didn't fully understand it then. You do now. That's why you hoard. Not gold, not beauty, but beans, cloth, little pots with half lids, crumbs of soap wrapped in cloth like treasure. You've become a crow for comfort, a squirrel for survival. The cottage begins to shift with the seasons too. The drafts sneak in like gossip. The bed creaks with a new kind of reluctance. And the kettle seems to whistle more angrily, as if protesting its overtime hours. You double-check everything. The thatch, the door frame, the shelves. You test each hinge like a midwife with a suspicion. Because when winter comes, every creak becomes a threat. Every weakness, a leak. And you've learned the hard way, fixing something in snow takes 10 times the effort of fixing it in sun. In the village square, the mood is changing too. The market feels tighter, fewer laughs, more elbows. People tuck things deeper into their baskets. They count coins twice. Generosity dries up before the frost even does. You meet Marta there. She sells dried apples and rumors. She looks at your face and smirks. Stocking up are you? You raise an eyebrow. Preparing. She shrugs. I prepare with prayer. You prepare with pickles. You both chuckle, but only one of you has jars. Later that night, you sit by the fire. The stew is thinner than you'd like, but not thinner than it needs to be. You've started rationing already, quietly, even though no one else has. It feels premature, but also wise. You tell yourself it's not fear, it's readiness. But in the corner of your mind, a little voice whispers, what if it's not enough? There's a scholarly debate You know about the psychological toll of medieval winters on women. Some argue that the season confined them, cut them off from social exchange, increased isolation. Others suggest winter-empowered women forced indoor time gave them control of food stores, household rituals, and story sharing. You suspect it's both. You feel both. You are the keeper of the house, yes, but also the one pacing it, measuring the quiet like a threat. You are the one making broth from bones. The one hiding an extra loaf behind the flour sack, just in case someone else runs out before you do. You tell no one about the hidden loaf. That's not selfishness. That's insurance. Sometimes you go to bed early, not out of tiredness, out of conservation. If you sleep, you don't eat. If you stay warm under all 3 blankets, you save wood. You dream of spring not like a hope, but like a rescue that might never come. In those dreams, it's always muddy and green. Someone's laughing. Someone's eating a pear. And you're just not cold anymore. But then you wake, and it's still dark, and the fire is still low, and you rise again. You tuck your hands into your sleeves. You count jars. You whisper to the hearth. And when someone knocks a boy from the other end of the village asking for salt because his mother miscounted you, give him a small pouch. He offers to trade. You wave it off. But the next day, he leaves a stone by your door. Smooth, pale, with a hole through the middle. For luck. You hang it on a string in your window. Because even as winter approaches, you believe in luck. Or at the very least, the kindness that pretends to be it. By the time snow really comes, you'll have forgotten most of this panic. It will become routine. Soup, firewood, mending. But right now is the season of fear. The season of lists. Of noticing every cracked bowl and unfinished stitch. Of wondering if your bones can hold you through another deep cold. But you will. Because you always have. And because even winter can't argue with a woman who is ready. The stew simmers. The wind taps. You pull the curtain closed. And the darkness stays outside just for tonight. Aching feet, aching head, and the unspoken evening prayer. You feel it first in your feet, a quiet throb that begins at the heels and works its way upward as if your soles have carried not just the weight of your body, but of the entire village's needs. You've been standing since before sunrise, and yet somehow the day has only just begun to exhale. The light outside has cooled to that particular gray, the kind that says, put down your tools, even when your hands aren't ready to listen. You shuffle across the threshold, one foot, dragging slightly behind the other, the way it does when you're too tired to pretend otherwise. Your shoulders ache, your jaw tightens, and somewhere behind your eyes, a little hammer taps politely for now. You could list what you did today, but no one's asking. No one ever asks. You gathered, you cleaned, you watched someone else's children, you mended, you scraped wax from a tallow bowl that should have been replaced last season. You chopped wood, even though your arms said no. You stirred a pot so long, the spoon became an extension of your wrist. And you smiled at least 3 times when you didn't feel like it. So yes, your head aches. From doing. From being. From holding in all the things you're not allowed to say aloud. Like how tired you are of the noise. Or the silence. You sit on the stool by the hearth, not quite collapsing, just letting yourself tilt. The room hums with the slow drip of fatigue. You know this rhythm well. The fire has been fed, the door is barred, and the outside world has respectfully retreated for now. This is the softest part of the day, but also the loneliest. There's a phrase you once heard from a traveling friar muttered after a long sermon: "Even Christ needed rest." You liked that. Not for the theology, though you're no stranger to the rosary, but because it gave you permission to sit, to breathe, to not answer right away when someone yells from across the yard. You reach for the small cloth pouch on the shelf, the one with the dried lavender and peppermint leaves. A little comfort steeped in boiled rainwater. The mug warms your hands, your wrists, your mood. You take a slow sip and let your thoughts wander not too far. You remember how your mother used to end each day with a whispered prayer, not on her knees, just there by the fire, quiet, private, more ritual than religion. She never asked for anything, never begged or bargained, just thanked. Thanked the roof for holding, the fire for staying lit, the bread for rising. You find yourself doing the same now, not aloud, not every night, but often enough that it feels like part of your skin. The unspoken evening prayer. And no, it's not always gratitude. Sometimes it's a sigh, a sentence half formed, a word mouthed but never heard. That counts too. There's a scholarly debate if you're curious about whether prayer for medieval women was more spiritual or more social. Some argue it was a communal binding, a shared script that shaped identity. Others say it was the only private thing women truly had, their thoughts spoken in candlelight, never written down. You know where you stand. You believe in the quiet, in the way your lips move even when no one sees, in the way a sentence whispered into firelight can carry a day's burden out of your chest. Tonight, you whisper something like, "Thanks," and something like, "Please let tomorrow be kind." You stretch your legs, rub the heel that's starting to blister again, and think absurdly about how much your shoes weigh, not in pounds, but in memory. These were your second best pair. The best ones were borrowed by a cousin and never returned. You try not to resent that, but still, you remember them, the way they didn't pinch, the way they didn't betray you on wet cobblestones. There's a strange intimacy to pain you've carried long enough. It becomes a kind of companion, a reminder that you've lasted. You press your fingers against your temples and hum a little tune your grandmother used to sing, not a real melody, just a trail of sound meant to distract your nerves. It works. For a moment. Then the kettle clinks, the fire pops, and the wind outside starts talking again. You don't listen to what it says. You've heard enough from the wind over the years. It usually just complains. You think of the others in the village curled under their roofs, muttering similar prayers. Or maybe none at all. Some women still kneel. Some lie awake staring at beams that haven't fallen yet. And some, like you, simply wait for the ache to ease enough to lie down. You finally rise, move to the bed. It's not soft, but it's yours. The blanket is scratchy, but you know where the holes are. And your body, trained by years of repetition, finds its place without thought. You curl on your side, one hand under your cheek. You listen for something. Not danger, not drama, just stillness. And when it arrives, you exhale like someone who has survived something. Because in a way, you have. Another day, another quiet victory. And as your breath slows and the fire becomes embers, your last thought is not profound. It's not poetic. It's simply, "I did enough." And that whispered into the dark is a kind of prayer too. When the body betrays the schedule, your body doesn't ask permission. It simply changes, without warning, without apology. One day, You rise feeling fine, perhaps even hopeful, and by midday, the ache has settled beneath your ribs, like an unwanted visitor who plans to stay the week. Sometimes it's your hip, sometimes your gut, sometimes the strange, spiraling tension that wraps around your back like a second bodice, too tight, too familiar. There's no predicting it, no controlling it, and certainly no rescheduling it. Today it's your head, a throb like a church bell echoing from the crown downward, sending messages no one invited. You squint at the morning light through your tiny window and already wish for dusk. But you get up anyway, because no one pauses the day for a woman's discomfort. There's bread to stretch, pots to scrape, and neighbors who ask questions with their eyes even when their mouths stay shut. You pull your shawl tighter. Your joints argue with the cold. Your stomach makes no promises. And something beneath your skin feels slow, sluggish, like your own body has decided to sabotage your carefully constructed routine. It does that sometimes, especially now that you're older. There's a scholarly debate you might be interested to know about how medieval medicine treated women's ailments. Some texts blamed wandering wombs, yes really, as though the uterus had its own travel itinerary. Others accused humor's demons or the moon. Few asked the women themselves. You shuffle toward the hearth one step slower than usual. The firewood feels heavier. The air feels thicker. Even the cat, who usually demands attention, watches you from a distance as if unsure whether you're friend or shadow today. You pour water, spill some. You don't curse. You sigh, and that sigh carries more weight than any complaint. There are days when your body works against you. Cramps arrive like bad news slipped under the door. Fevers whisper at your temples, and fatigue folds itself into every movement. But here's the thing they don't tell you. You still have to stir the soup. You still have to patch the roof, chase the goat, and nod politely when someone offers unhelpful advice about nettle tea. So you do. You do it all just slower, with pauses, with clenched teeth behind smiles, with whispered prayers that sound more like negotiations. There's something both cruel and comedic about how your body times these betrayals. Always before market day. Always when the laundry pile is tallest. Always when someone else needs you most. You sit down on a bench that wobbles more than usual. You don't have the strength to fix it today. That's tomorrow's betrayal. You rub your temple with one hand and your belly with the other, as if bartering for peace. It doesn't help, but it's something to do. Outside, the village hums with its usual rhythm, children arguing over pebbles, geese honking like unpaid heralds, and somewhere a hammer tapping on stubborn wood. You're not part of it today, not fully. You exist slightly beside the world, like a candle burning at midday, present but not necessary. Still, you know this phase, this particular discomfort. You've danced with it before. Sometimes it's a visitor who overstays. Sometimes it's a messenger carrying news from inside you, whispers about age change or things you never named. You once asked the old midwife what it meant when the pain came, but nothing followed. She just shrugged. Means your body is reminding you it remembers, whatever that means. You think about her sometimes, how she always smelled like rosemary and secrets. She knew things even when she claimed not to. You lie down briefly on the wooden bench, curling just enough to ease the pull in your abdomen. You won't sleep, but you'll pretend. Pretending helps. It buys you a moment without obligation, and in that moment, you remember that your body, this aching, stuttering, inconvenient vessel, has carried you through storms, through hunger, through solitude, through years no one recorded. It has disappointed you, yes, but it has also endured, and maybe that's enough. You open your eyes to the flicker of firelight. The room hasn't changed, the chores haven't vanished, but you've softened just a little toward your own limbs. You sit again, sip lukewarm tea, add a pinch of mint, even though it won't help much. It's the gesture that counts. You wrap yourself in the heavy wool cloak you usually save for winter and move to the doorway, just to breathe, just to feel the air without answering to it. The breeze is gentle, kind even. You close your eyes, and this too is part of the rhythm. The betrayal, the negotiation, the repair. You will mend again. You always do. Tomorrow maybe your body will feel more like an ally. Today, it is a teacher with no chalk, only riddles. You are learning stillness and forgiveness. You are remembering that a pause is not failure. It is a breath. And you, woman alone, woman misread, woman misunderstood, deserve to breathe. Even when the village doesn't see your labor, even when the ache returns, even when nothing changes but the date, you step back inside. Let the door rest on its hinge, and as you settle into the familiar chair, you offer yourself the smallest kindness you know. Not everything needs to be done today. And with that, you let your muscles soften. You let your expectations ease. And in the hush between effort and acceptance, you find something like peace, just enough to carry you into tomorrow. You wouldn't call it a bath. That word feels too generous, too round with luxury, too echoing with marble and poetry. What you do is more strategic. A cloth warmed by the hearth, a bowl with water that's not too cold, a quick, calculated swipe beneath layers of wool and modesty. You clean what's most likely to offend and skip the rest. It's not that you don't want to feel clean. It's that soap is a precious thing. That hot water is a half-day affair. And that the mere act of undressing in this drafty room feels like a dare you didn't agree to. Still tonight you try. You've locked the door, such as it is a wooden plank and a hope. You've waited until the village quiets, until no one might knock. Because even washing in a body like yours, in a life like yours, feels like something best done in silence. You unwrap your layers slowly. The belt, first the wool, next, and then the linen chemise that's clung to you like a second skin since Monday. Beneath it all, you're marked not with tattoos or jewels, but with the dull imprint of the day, a red welt where your belt cinched too tight, a faint line of ash along your arm from stirring the fire, a collection of dust at your ankles, like a map of everywhere you've been. There's a scholarly debate about how often medieval people bathed. Some argue that peasants rarely did, maybe once a season. Others say they washed more than we give credit for rivers, tubs, bathhouses, when not banned by clergy. The truth, like most things, is probably somewhere in between. Tonight, you lean toward the between. You dip the cloth. Wring it tight. Press it to your face, and for a moment, the world hushes. There's something sacred in that small act. The way the heat softens your cheeks, the way the day's sweat lifts like confession. You work your way down, neck, arms, the space beneath your breasts that's collected more effort than air all week. Each motion is slow, not because you're savoring it, though maybe you are, but because this is the one part of your life not measured by someone else's needs. No one else waits on this. No one else judges how thorough you are. No one knocks to ask for broth while you're mid-swipe. It's yours, even if it only lasts 15 minutes. You wash the space behind your ears and imagine all the gossip you've caught and ignored sluicing away. You wash your hands again and remember all the things they've done today. Held bread, held a child, held your own patience together. You wash between your thighs, carefully, respectfully. There's no shame in it, but there is silence. Because women like you are not supposed to speak of such things, even when your own body keeps the calendar more faithfully than any scribe. You remember a girl once years ago who whispered about soaking her feet in rose water before bed. You'd laughed at the extravagance, then gone home and dreamed of it for 3 nights straight. Tonight, your water has a sprig of lavender in it, stolen from a neighbor's edge garden where it grew wild and arrogant. You don't feel guilty. Lavender doesn't belong to anyone, really. It belongs to those who need it most. You squeeze the cloth and place it over your chest like armor. There's something strange, isn't there, about how the simplest rituals feel the most profound. You don't have relics. You don't have holy robes. You have water, a rag, and the will to make it mean something. There's a small mirror in the corner, polished tin bent at the edge. You don't look at it often. Tonight you glance. The face that looks back is not the one from your youth. It's sharper, softer, wiser, wearier. It's yours. You nod to her. You dress again. Clean linen, soft from wear, not starch. You wrap your hair in a scarf and pat the last drops of water from your collarbone. You feel not transformed exactly, but acknowledged, as if your own skin has decided to forgive you for the week. Outside, the stars hum. Inside, your hearth purrs with quiet warmth. You pour the water out the back door, watching the steam twist into the night air like a small ghost of effort. In the bathhouses of the cities, they say women gossip and sing, pour oils on their skin, scrub each other's backs with laughter. That may be true, but here, your silence is your song. No one praises you for washing, but you do it anyway, because you're still here, because your body, though worn, still carries you, and because sometimes the best thing a woman can do is prove, if only to herself, that she still deserves care, even if no one draws her a bath, even if no one notices, even if the water is cold. You tuck your hands into your sleeves, press your warm palms against your belly, and breathe. Tomorrow, the dirt will return, the sweat, the soot, the ache. But for now, your skin is your own, and that is a kind of wealth. Dreams of rest, interrupted by the familiar. Snore. The cottage is quiet, too quiet at first, then not quiet at all. The thatch creaks like a question no one answers. The wind pokes the shutters with its long, moody fingers, and from the neighbor's wall, which is also your wall, you hear it. That snore. Thick as stew, sharp as betrayal. You don't remember when it started. Maybe around the time her second husband moved in. Maybe around the time your patients moved out. You lie on your straw mattress, counting heartbeats, then footsteps that never come. You shift your body gently, hoping to find a softer spot, a quieter position, a miracle. It never works, still you try. Your blanket is wool scratchy as gossip warm in patches and always smells faintly of goat. You pull it up to your chin and exhale slowly. The fires died down to a dull red hush, and even the coals seemed to understand this is not the hour for ambition. Outside, the village is sleeping. Men dream of harvests and hunts. Children dream of bread. And women dream in layers of chores, not yet done, of futures, not yet chosen, of voices they never raised. You tonight dream of nothing, because sleep has not come yet. Instead, you listen. You've learned the rhythm of the snore next door, the long inhale, the pause, the low, disgruntled exhale that sounds like a goose sighing into a barrel. It's almost comforting now, familiar, like a bad song that's always playing in the back of the tavern. There's a debate among scholars, of course there is, about how medieval people slept. Some say they had segmented sleep, first sleep, then a waking period in the middle of the night, then second sleep. Others argue that idea is romanticized based on a few scattered texts and one monk who was probably just restless. You think both are true, depending on whether the roof leaks or the cat's in heat. Tonight is one of those middle hours. Not morning, not night. Just a floating hour when time loosens its grip and you drift, not awake, not asleep, just hovering. Your thoughts wander. You think of a pie you once made years ago. Apple with too much salt and not enough cinnamon. You remember the man who ate it anyway, smiling like it was a feast. He didn't stay long. None of them did. You shift again. Your back complains. So does your knee. And one of your toes, for reasons it refuses to disclose. The snore next door pauses. You hold your breath. Is it over? No. It resumes with a vigor that suggests he's now dreaming of plowing fields with his nose. You close your eyes tighter, as if that will shut out the sound. Instead, memories rise. A cold morning, a basin of water, hands rubbing warmth into a child's fingers. Was it yours? Was it someone else's? In the darkness, everything blurs. You once read or were told that dreams are the soul sorting through its laundry. If that's true, your soul has a full wash line and no sun to dry it. Still, you try again. Breathe in, hold, exhale. A trick the apothecary's widow swears by. She also swears by sleeping with garlic under the pillow, but that only gave you nightmares about soup. You curl your body tighter like a comma in a sentence you never got to finish. Sleep finally begins to approach. Not galloping, but creeping like a cat who's unsure if it's welcome. You don't move. You don't breathe too deeply. You wait. And just as your body begins to slip, a thump from the rafters, then a scritch. The rat. Of course. You roll onto your back and stare at the beams above, wondering how something so small can sound like it's wearing boots. Maybe it is. Maybe it's a knight in full armor, sent to keep you from peace. You laugh softly to yourself, and that oddly is what does it. The tension breaks. The silliness slips in, and sleep, who had been lurking at the edge, finally decides you're not so bad. You drift. In your dream, you're walking through a market, but no one turns to stare. You wear a fine cloak stitched with blue thread. You're buying apples, and someone touches your arm, not to grab, not to scold, just to steady. It's gentle. It's simple. It's quiet. You wake just before dawn. The snore is gone. The rat, perhaps tired, has retired. Your limbs ache, but no worse than usual. You sit up, stretch, and rub your eyes. In the fading dark, you feel a strange calm. You didn't sleep long, but you slept. And that's a victory. In medieval life, rest is never guaranteed. Not for peasants, not for widows, not for anyone who doesn't own silence. But tonight you carved a bit of it, claimed it, held it, and now you rise. The world doesn't know what you dreamed, but it doesn't matter. You do. And that's enough to face the noise again. Take a breath. The last ember in the hearth blinks at you, a lazy red eye that refuses to shut completely. You've swept the floor again. Not because it needed it, but because your hands did. Outside, the wind has quieted like a child finally worn out from tantrums. And you, in your corner of the world, are unwinding without flourish. There's no one waiting for you. No voice calling you to bed. No arms stretched out across your blanket. No snores. No feet stealing warmth. Just you, a few creaks in the beams, and the soft sound of the world deciding not to need you for a moment. You sit on the edge of your straw mattress and pull the blanket over your legs, watching the smoke snake up toward the tiny hole in the roof, where stars sometimes peek through if the clouds are feeling generous. The air is full of wood and wool and faint onion. It's not romantic. It's not tragic. It's just life. There's a saying the older women mutter when they think you're not listening. She'll die alone, but at least her pots will be clean. It's supposed to sting. It doesn't. You smile when you hear it. Because the pots are clean. Because you don't live for their eulogies. Earlier today, you mended your hem with thread. You dyed yourself onion skin and nettle. It's slightly uneven. No one will see it. That makes it perfect. You fed the chickens. You stirred the stew. You hummed a song with no words. No one clapped. Still, the day bowed to you as it ended, the sun slipping behind the hill like a performer behind the curtain. And now you're here, with the straw beneath you, prickly uneven home. With the smoke above, you scented with thyme and soot, and with a heart that despite everything still beats, like it has something left to say. There's a historical footnote that most people skip, how unmarried women, especially widows, kept entire villages functioning. They watched other people's children, made medicinal brews, nursed the dying, taught the young. They held the quiet parts of life together like invisible stitches, not named, rarely praised, but crucial. You're thinking of that now as you place your feet under the blanket and listen for the night sounds, the owl, the wind, the occasional muttered dream from the girl still asleep in the far cot. She came again tonight, the one with fear behind her eyes and hope behind that. You fed her. You listened. You did not ask for a story. It was enough that she came. Maybe she'll leave tomorrow. Maybe not. But for tonight she sleeps. And you, strange woman, with no husband, no dowry, no downtrodden title, you are her safety. There's a debate in some monastery somewhere, surely, about what constitutes holiness. Is it chanting in a stone hall? Or is it letting someone take your last clean blanket without complaint? You think it's the second. The stars are faint tonight, but you don't need them. You know the shape of the ceiling of the rafters of your own breath in the dark. You shift. Your body aches in the places where stories are stored. Knees, back, hands. You didn't need parchment to record your life. You've written it in bread dough and bandages and brushwood. You've written it in small acts no one will ever trace, but you remember. And now you let your body settle. The straw rustles under you like dry applause. The fire gives one final sigh, and your eyes begin to close. You've done enough for today, more than enough. The village sleeps dreaming of names and legacies and ledgers. You sleep, knowing you've already become something they'll never catalog. A presence, a space, a thread that held without asking for credit. Tomorrow you'll rise. You always do. But tonight, the world doesn't need fixing. It just needs someone to witness its stillness. And that quiet, unnoticed, unspectacular is what you were made for. You turn on your side sigh once and finally rest. The fire is out now. All that's left is the warmth it gave and the way it softened the shadows. You've wandered through kitchens and cottages, cloisters and marketplaces. You've spun thread beside other women and buried secrets in your apron folds. You've stitched stories into silence and silence into survival. And now, here at the end of the story, you're not alone. Not really. Because even if no scroll ever bore your name, your quiet strength stitched the seams of the Middle Ages. Even if no monk ever inked your face in gold leaf, you were the one feeding healing, mending, holding. The one with no title, but too many roles. The one who said less and did more. History may not always remember you, but tonight we do. We remember the warmth you gave from a half-empty pot, the comfort you offered with a patchwork blanket, the girl you helped the fence, you fixed the fire you kept alive. And we remember that rest is something you always earned but were rarely given. So tonight, you get it. No demands, no glances, no questions, just peace. The world is quieter now. It breathes with you. And maybe that's enough. That's the story. For tonight, may your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.